Somewhere deep in the Iya Valley of rural Japan, there is a village where people still wait at the bus stop, still sit in classrooms, still look out over the fields, and still gather in doorways. They just happen to be made of cloth and straw. The village is called Nagoro. Its human population has faded year by year, while handmade dolls have quietly taken the places of the absent. There are dolls at the roadside, dolls in school desks, dolls in farm plots. From a distance, it can look as if the village is still functioning in some half-convincing way. Then you get closer, and the illusion falls apart. Japan has more places like this than most people realize. Some were built on coal, copper, sulfur, or shipbuilding, and collapsed when the industry beneath them gave way. Some were hollowed out by age and depopulation so slowly that the disappearance barely seemed to register. Others were drowned by disaster, closed by policy, or emptied by forces too large for any one town to resist. A few have become heritage sites, a few have become tourist curiosities, and a few still feel too recent to comfortably package as history. That is the part people tend to miss. Japan's ghost towns are not just relics from some vanished industrial age. They are also warnings about what happens when prosperity depends on a single employer, when geography turns against you, or when a country grows older and smaller, faster than it can replace itself. Some of these places disappeared in fire, some in silence. Some were left behind so quickly that buildings, furniture, and daily routines seem to have only just gone cold. And some, somehow, are still caught in the unsettling space between abandonment and return. So let us talk about 12 ghost towns in Japan you are not supposed to know. And we are starting with the one where the population was replaced by scarecrows. Number 12 is Nagoro in Tokushima Prefecture. Nagoro is not a ghost town in the traditional sense. That is what makes it more disturbing. The village still exists. A few people still live there. But the social life of the place has become a kind of handmade reconstruction. As younger residents moved away and older ones died, the village thinned out until absence became the dominant feature of the landscape. Then, artist Tsukimi Ayano began making life-sized dolls. At first, they were practical, almost private creations. Over time, they multiplied. Now they sit at bus stops, occupy abandoned classrooms, tend imaginary crops, and lean against fences as if they still have errands to run. The effect is not theatrical in the usual sense. It is gentler than that. Stranger too. This is not a place performing death. It is a place trying in its own quiet way to hold shape after the people have gone. Nagoro matters because it shows a distinctly Japanese form of disappearance. There was no single explosion of collapse, no spectacular disaster, no overnight corporate betrayal. The village was not destroyed. It was simply left behind one move, one funeral, one unreturned train ticket at a time. And that may be the more unsettling version. A town can die all at once. It can also fade so gradually that by the time anyone notices, the replacements are already sitting in the windows. Number 11 takes us offshore to somewhere considerably softer on the surface and sadder underneath. Tashirojima in Miyagi Prefecture. Most people know Tashirojima as Cat Island, which is a very effective piece of branding. It suggests whimsy internet photographs and the kind of day trip people can feel cheerful about. And yes, there are cats everywhere. They wander the lanes, sleep beside walls, and receive the kind of attention most shrinking communities can only dream of. But the reason the cats dominate the island is not especially cute. They thrive in part because the people do not. Tashirojima once had a much larger fishing community. Like so many remote islands in Japan, it was shaped by hard work, aging residents, and the slow attrition of younger generations leaving for the mainland. Over time, the human population fell sharply. The cats remained. Then they became the island's identity. There is something darkly efficient about that transformation. A place loses its people, gains a marketable symbol, and re-enters public consciousness as an attraction. The demographic crisis becomes a postcard. To be clear, Tashirojima is not abandoned. It still has residents, and it still has life. But it belongs in this list because it shows how depopulation can change not only the makeup of a place, but the way outsiders choose to understand it. The island did not become famous for what it lost. It became famous for what filled the vacuum. Which is one way of dealing with disappearance, I suppose. If the neighbors are gone, at least the cats are cooperative. Number 10 is Ogoya in Ishikawa Prefecture. Ogoya was once a mining town, the kind of settlement built on extraction and belief. In the early years of modern Japan, mines like this helped turn remote mountain regions into productive nodes of the national economy. People came for work. Infrastructure followed. A town rose around the ore. The mine at Ogoya operated from the Meiji period until the 1960s. By then, the old logic had started to fail. Resources were depleted, industry shifted, and the settlement lost the reason it had once existed. Not all at once, but decisively enough. What remains now is not exactly a ruin, and not exactly a living town. Ogoya survives through preservation. There is a mining museum. There are tunnel experiences. There are remnants of industrial machinery and rail history. The place has been curated into memory. That gives Ogoya a different mood from the towns that were simply deserted. It has been granted an afterlife, but a controlled one. Visitors can learn what happened there. They can stand inside the shadow of an industry that once justified the settlement. But the town itself no longer has to function as a town. There is a strange dignity in that, and also a strange emptiness. Places like Ogoya survive by becoming explanations of themselves. The economy ends. The exhibits begin. And that is often how ghost towns remain acceptable to the present. We do not revive them. We interpret them. Number 9 brings us into the mountains of Ehime Prefecture, to the old Beishi copper mine and the settlement of Tonaru. Beishi was not a short-lived boomtown. It was a long industrial story. Copper was discovered there in the late 17th century, and for centuries the mine fed the growing power of the Sumitomo enterprise. In other words, this was not some reckless flash of frontier optimism. It was a durable machine of extraction with deep historical roots. Settlements in the region rose and shifted with the mine. Workers lived in steep terrain infrastructure threaded through the mountains, and industry carved itself into the landscape. Then eventually, the copper era ended. The mine closed in the 1970s, and the settlements that depended on it lost their reason for being. Today, the ruins in the mountains have been romanticized by some as an Eastern Machu Picchu, which is a tidy way of saying that once the labor is gone, the scenery gets much better press. That contrast is what makes Beishi so effective in a story like this. The remains are beautiful. The forest is thick. The stone and industrial remnants look almost noble against the slopes. But beauty has a way of softening memory. It can make extraction look picturesque, and hardship look elegantly historical. This place represents a recurring pattern in ghost town history. First, the industry remakes the mountain. Then the mountain slowly takes the settlement back, and by the time tourists arrive with cameras, the original transaction has already been cleaned up by moss and time. Number 8 is where things begin to feel harsher. Matsuo Mine in Iwate Prefecture. At its height, Matsuo was one of Japan's great sulfur mining centers. The town built around it was not some ragged outpost. It had apartment blocks, schools, services, and the infrastructure of confidence. In its best years, people called it paradise above the clouds, which is exactly the sort of phrase a place should never trust. Sulfur brought prosperity. It also brought contamination. When the economics weakened and the mine shut down in the early 1970s, the town's future collapsed with remarkable speed. Residents left, buildings emptied, the familiar pattern repeated. What makes Matsuo distinct is what it left behind. Not just ruins, but pollution severe enough to require long-term environmental treatment. Acid mine drainage continued to poison surrounding water systems, and the legacy of extraction outlasted the life of the community itself. So when people talk about ghost towns, as if they are simply atmospheric shells, Matsuo offers a correction. Some dead towns continue to do damage. The workers leave, the industry ends. The chemistry does not care. The apartment blocks, there have become some of the most haunting industrial images in Japan. Long concrete structures, broken windows, empty interiors. A settlement that once signaled modernity now looks like a warning issued too late. Progress is not always linear. Sometimes it goes backward, and sometimes it leaves contaminated runoff in the valley, while the buildings rot above it. Number 7 is Yubari in Hokkaido. Yubari is not fully dead, which may be why it feels worse than some of the places that are. A completely abandoned town has a kind of finished quality. Yubari does not. It survives, but in the uneasy shadow of what it used to be. This was once one of Japan's major coal cities. At its peak, the population was well into the 6 figures. Mines supported the economy. Workers supported the mines. Entire neighborhood schools and daily routines were built around the certainty that the coal industry would continue to justify them. Then, national energy policy changed. Coal declined. The jobs disappeared. People left. The city entered a long contraction that became one of the best-known examples of regional collapse in modern Japan. Yubari is useful in this countdown because it breaks the clean image of a ghost town. The place still exists, it still has residents, but vast portions of its former life belong to a vanished world. Infrastructure built for one scale of community no longer fits the population that remains. The old industrial confidence is gone, but the physical shell keeps insisting that something larger used to happen here. There is no need to exaggerate the symbolism. It is already obvious enough. A city can survive the death of its founding industry, but survival and recovery are not the same thing. Yubari did not disappear all at once. It disappeared one decision at a time, one shutdown at a time, one departing family at a time. That slower death can be harder to narrate. It is also harder to reverse. Number 6 takes us back to Nagasaki Prefecture, to Ikeshima. If Hashima is the famous abandoned coal island, Ikeshima is its quieter, stranger cousin. The mine there closed in the early 2000s, which already makes it feel less historical and more uncomfortably recent. This is not some distant industrial chapter. People still remember it in the present tense. Ikeshima once held thousands of residents connected to coal mining. Apartment blocks rose on the island. Services operated. Ferries linked the settlement to the larger world. Then the mine shut, the population collapsed, and the island entered that peculiar state where the ruins begin to outnumber the people. A small number of residents still remain. That is what gives Ikeshima its special atmosphere. It is not a dead island. It is a mostly dead one. Daily life still exists there, but it exists beside huge stretches of abandonment. Visitors can tour parts of the old mine. They can see the residential blocks and industrial remnants. They can stand in a place where the machinery of the past still seems to have only recently gone quiet. There is something more disorienting about partial survival than total abandonment. It denies closure. It says the story is over, except not entirely. Someone is still collecting mail. Someone still lives down the road from a dead industry. Ikeshima feels like an island caught between two categories, which is probably why it lingers in the mind. It has not been fully reclaimed by history. and it has not been fully returned to ordinary life. It is suspended there with the sea on all sides, and the old purpose gone. Number 5 is different again. Hibara Village in Fukushima Prefecture. Most ghost towns leave structures behind. Hibara left a lake. In the late 19th century, the eruption of Mount Bandai triggered massive landslides that reshaped the region and created what is now Lake Hibara. Settlements were buried or submerged. Roads vanished. The old geography of everyday life was rewritten by force. Hibara had once been an active post town, a place tied to movement exchange and routine travel. Then the mountain intervened, and much of the settlement disappeared beneath water and debris. Recent scientific work has suggested that elements of the town may remain preserved below the lake bed, which is one of those facts that does not need any embellishment. An old town sleeping underwater is already enough. This entry matters because it widens the meaning of ghost town. Not every vanished place dies from economics. Some are erased by landscape. A mine can close. A policy can relocate a village. But a volcanic disaster does something more absolute. It removes not only the people, but the physical terms on which their community existed. And yet, even here, the emotional logic is familiar. There was once a functioning world. It had roads, buildings, errands, and names. Then very suddenly, it did not. A town under a lake has a mythic quality to it, but the truth is more practical and more unsettling. The people of Hibara did not become legend. They lost a place. The water came later. Number 4 is where the video stops feeling historical and starts feeling modern in a way that is harder to comfortably classify. Tomioka in Fukushima Prefecture. Before the disaster, Tomioka was an ordinary town. That matters. It was not some extreme outpost built on a remote mountain or an isolated industrial island. It was a normal community with homes, shops, schools, roads, and routines, which is exactly why what happened there hit so hard. After the earthquake and tsunami of 2011, the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear disaster forced mass evacuations across nearby towns. Tomioka was emptied. Streets fell silent. Houses stood intact, but inaccessible. Cars remained where they had been left. Vegetation began pressing into built space. The town looked less like a ruin than an interrupted sentence. In later years, parts of Tomioka reopened as decontamination and reconstruction moved forward. But reopening a place is not the same thing as restoring its old reality. The visual memory of evacuation zones lingers. So does the knowledge that this was not ancient history, not even close. That is why Tomioka belongs so high on this list. It shows how quickly a modern town can become ghost-like, without fire, without bombardment, and without the dramatic aesthetics people usually associate with abandonment. Sometimes all it takes is contamination and exclusion. There is a particular unease in places like this. The buildings are still recognizable. The scale is familiar. It looks like somewhere people should still be living. And for a time, they were not allowed to. That kind of emptiness does not feel romantic. It feels administrative, which in its own way is worse. Number 3 is Nami, and especially the Ukedo district also in Fukushima Prefecture. Nami carries both the violence of the tsunami and the long after-image of nuclear evacuation. It is one thing to lose a town to a single event. It is another to have destruction layered with exclusions memory, layered with contamination, and return complicated by forces that do not end when the water recedes. The Ukedo district has become one of the clearest symbols of that reality. The preserved elementary school there stands as a disaster memorial, its survival tied not to luck exactly, but to timing and evacuation. Students and staff escaped before the tsunami engulfed the building. The school remained damaged and emptied as one of those places where absence becomes the main exhibit. There are ghost towns where the abandoned objects are the most affecting part. In Hokkaido, it is the suspended purpose of the building itself. A school exists to contain a future. To preserve one after disaster is to preserve the shape of interrupted continuity. Nami is powerful because it resists simplification. It is not only a tsunami story, not only a nuclear story, not only a rebuilding story. It is all of them at once. And that layered damage makes it one of the strongest examples in Japan of a place becoming ghost-like within living memory. When people speak casually about resilience, they usually prefer stories with clean arcs. Disaster recovery return. Nami does not offer that comfort so easily. Some places come back. Some come back unevenly. Some return physically while remaining psychologically altered. And that is both deeply moving and quietly devastating. Number 2 is Hashima, better known as Gunkanjima in Nagasaki Prefecture. If there is a single ghost town in Japan that has entered global imagination, it is this one. And for once, the reputation is deserved. Hashima began as a coal mining island, developed by Mitsubishi in the late 19th century. Over time, it became one of the most densely populated places on Earth. Concrete apartment blocks rose almost wall to wall. More than 5,000 people lived on a tiny island in the East China Sea, packed into a self-contained industrial world of housing, schools, shops, and labor. From a distance, the island looked like a warship, which is how it got the nickname Gunkanjima Battleship Island. The name fits a little too well. It was built for a mission. It served its function. Then the age that justified it ended. When coal declined and the mine closed in the 1970s, residents left. The island was abandoned. Sea air and storms began dismantling what human ambition had compacted so tightly together. Concrete cracked, interiors emptied. The island became a monument to industrial confidence stripped of purpose. What makes Hashima so potent is the scale of compression. Entire lives were stacked there. Childhood's shifts, meals, marriages, routines. Then, almost all at once, the social organism was removed, and the architecture remained like a fossilized shell. It is easy to photograph Hashima as a cinematic ruin. Many people do. But the island works best as a warning against the belief that density infrastructure and corporate power can make a community permanent. They cannot. They can only make the ruins more dramatic when permanence turns out to be temporary. And then there is number 1, Futaba in Fukushima Prefecture. Hashima is iconic. Futaba is harder. That is why it belongs here. Before the disaster, Futaba was a normal town neighboring the Fukushima Daiichi plant. It had ordinary streets, ordinary buildings, and the sort of daily life that rarely gets described because it feels too obvious to mention. But ordinary life is exactly what ghost towns erase, and exactly what people underestimate until it is gone. After the events of 2011, Futaba became one of the clearest symbols of prolonged displacement in modern Japan. For years, it stood inside the exclusion zone, emptied by the nuclear crisis and defined by absence. Evacuation orders lingered. Access remained restricted. The town existed, but not in a way that resembled town life. Only much later did parts of Futaba begin to reopen. Even then, the reopening carried an almost unreal quality. A railway station returns. A few facilities resume operation. Official language shifts toward revitalization. But none of that cancels the fact that the place spent years functioning as a ghost town, not of the distant past, but of the contemporary state. That is what makes Futaba the strongest ending. It is not a sealed historical chapter. It is unfinished. It lives in the uncomfortable territory between abandonment and recovery, between policy and memory, between physical return and the harder question of whether a community can ever truly be restored after such a rupture. There is no easy irony here. No picturesque mountain reclaiming the ruins. No charming cats. No curated museum version of industrial nostalgia. Futaba is too recent, too administrative, too human for that. It forces the point that ghost towns are not always ancient or remote. Sometimes they are modern places that fell silent under circumstances people still argue over, legislate around, and try with mixed success to move past. That may be the most unsettling version of all. Not a dead town preserved in amber, but a town asked to become ordinary again after history made that impossible. If you take anything from these 12 places, maybe let it be this. Every one of them was once someone's normal, someone's commute, someone's school route, someone's apartment block, fishing pier, mine entrance, neighborhood shop, or bus stop. They were not built to become symbols. They were built to be lived in, and yet they still ended. Some because the ore ran out. Some because the jobs vanished. Some because the young left and never came back. Some because the mountain moved. Some because the sea arrived. Some because the state decided no one could stay. What links them is not just abandonment. It is the speed with which permanence can prove imaginary. A community can spend decades convincing itself it is stable, necessary, and rooted. Then one industry collapses, one policy shifts, one disaster arrives, and all that certainty starts to look embarrassingly temporary. Japan understands this in a particularly visible way, because its ghost towns are not all buried safely in the past. Some are preserved as heritage. Some are half-inhabited. Some have been rebranded. Some are still in the tense grammar of return. The story is ongoing. And that is the part worth sitting with. These places are not just strange corners of a faraway map. They are evidence that towns do not last because people expect them to. They last only as long as the systems beneath them hold. When those systems fail, the vending machines go dark, the ferry stops coming, the mine gates close, the school empties, and the roads lead somewhere else. Then the buildings remain for a while. Then even they begin to forget what they were for.